So for this third video, I thought we would just do a film I made with a client after I'd done some inner child work with them and interviewed them about it and put on some personal thoughts of my own, which would be very interesting for me to do and would put some of the theoretical positions we've been discussing into a more human frame.
Well, I'm Claire. I've been in the UK for 20 years. 20 years on Monday last week. And came to be in Warrington after meeting my ex-husband to be in Birmingham in a Christian rehabilitation centre where you had to refer yourself. You couldn't be referred to anyone. So I met him, hated where I was, saw it as an escape and went.
Now, this is not a session. It's an interview I had with Claire where she was willing to talk about our work together. But I still think it's worth noting that this is the first time we hear the voice of the child. Now, she's not speaking with the voice of the child, but she is speaking about the voice of the child. And if we were in a session now, or if you were talking with your client, this is where I'd start to bring it up. You know, I saw it as an escape and I went. She said, no, that is her child saying, I can let someone else be responsible for me. I can let someone else take care of me. I can put responsibility onto them. This is you can see the boundary issue there. So this would be the first step in our work together. If you were working with a client and they spoke like this, you'd be raising their awareness. You'd be helping them to hear the voice of the child and what the child was looking for or what the child wanted or needed at that time.
And I wasn't actually drinking when I got out of the rehabilitation centre. I was drinking one or twice for a couple, but not to the extent where you would have considered that I actually had a problem, and then it just got slowly and slowly worse. The more he dabbled in drugs and the more abusive and violent he became, the heavier my drinking became.
So what's being demonstrated here is what I call the flip. You'll see this again and again in addiction work, and it's worth making mention of here. I can't go into much detail. I could honestly talk all day about this, but I will do a longer piece or another video about this, so to do it justice. But for now, just recognize the idea that she's being out addicted here. Basically, to not go into too much detail, you will see this again and again where a completely self-obsessed and selfish person will suddenly turn into this complete obedient slave. He basically out-addicted her, and you'll hear her say that her drinking just got worse and worse when she suddenly felt she had to do everything for this person. As soon as she moved in with him, she became a kind of a slave, and this would be where she turned into the codependent.
Until, because of the domestic violence, it took my daughter. And then I just went downhill after that.
So you're in the recovery homes.
Yes.
Wanting to be reunited with your daughter.
Yes.
But separating from
divorcing him.
Divorcing from your husband. Okay. So what's it been like to be in this type of a group? I don't know if you can say anything about the idea that these are systemic ideas. These are relational ideas we've been looking at. I'm wondering if it's been different for you from anything you've done before.
I've never had a sort of relationship counselling, if that makes sense. So looking at a relationship, be it with my daughter or with another person, I actually haven't had any type of one-to-one counselling either. It's always been group counselling, and it's never been on a specific issue. It's never been about it's been about myself, but not about relationships, other than learning not to blame everybody else. So in a relationship in that sense, where you blame anyone else.
Sure.
But rather look at yourself.
What's it been like to think about a building and think about building a recovery? Has that added anything to your view?
It has done, especially that it's my own building.
That was a big factor for you.
That was a big factor, that it's not somebody else's building, because you always look at somebody and go, right, how did they do it?
Right.
And how am I going to emulate what they're doing to get to mine?
Of course. Yeah.
Instead of looking at myself and going, how do I need to get from A to B?
So how do I need to get from A to B? I think it's really worth mentioning here that this is really one of the simplest elements of the building recovery group, that we would introduce. And yet here you've got an intelligent, grown woman telling you that it had an enormous effect on her. And what are we actually talking about here? We're saying, well, if you were going to buy a house, you would pick a house that you liked. You would want the rooms in it you want in it. You wouldn't think about buying a house and saying, well, what kind of house do you want me to live in? And yet here you see so many people trying to recover using someone else's idea of what their recovery should look like. And I always use the house in Despicable Me. I always mention that. Have you seen that film, Despicable Me? Because there's no better example as you go along the street and there's all these kind of standard houses, and then there's his great monstrosity on the end. The one thing you can say about that house is it's definitely him. It's definitely no one else designed that, right? And that is the idea to get across, and how powerful it can be. Sure.
So you can use it as a starting point, but I don't think you can use it to actually grow yourself. You can only grow yourself so much if you're basing yourself on someone else.
So it's got to be your design.
Got to be me.
Absolutely. So I wonder if you could say something about the inner child sort of work that you've done.
My inner child runs away, slams doors, cries as soon as I get confronted with something that I don't like or scares me.
So here we hear Claire talking about her inner child, and you hear a lovely example here of how natural this becomes. She's laughing, she's talking about how her child reacts to things, and she's got a good knowledge of this. We did have a nickname and all the rest of the things that we talk about in the practice, and she's very familiar with this idea. You notice that she no longer feels that maybe she's in need of psychiatric attention or anything. It's nothing like that. She's perfectly comfortable with the idea that this earlier or younger part of her comes from a part of her brain in which there is no concept of time. So her child is with her right now. Her childhood experiences are with her right now. And when these things are triggered, they can be very powerful.
Then instead of thinking about it logically or asking myself why it's upsetting me, I would just slam a door and cry. Generally just run out the room and cry.
So there's a bit of freeze and there's a lot of flight.
A lot of flight.
So here's the first time we hear mention of the baby. And if this work went deeper, that's where we'd be going. We'd be starting to talk about how her child managed her baby. This is partly in the notes of part 2, where we talk about how Claire swapped her feelings for the rules of the boarding school that she went to, and externalized her emotions by saying, right, now if I follow the rules, I'll feel good. And so that was what she swapped her, essentially her emotional life for. Now, the baby, you'll have heard the baby talk because it was flight and freeze. And when it gets to that point, although the child's already been triggered, something's wrong here, I have to do something. When it gets to this sort of stage where people literally freeze and they can't speak or they run away, then we're talking about baby.
Everything is flight though. As soon as, it's always been the same though, as soon as if they raise their voice,
yes,
I'll run.
Right.
Or I'll cry.
So just worth mentioning here that if we were working with this client, if this was you in front of your client now, this is where you would catch on to the idea that she's talking directly here about triggering. She's saying, if anyone raises their voice, and what is the trigger? She's talking straight to baby there. I freeze or I run. And so it's worth mentioning there that we become sensitive to these trigger points. And effectively what she's saying is, my child takes over at those moments. She won't understand it that way. That's where the psychoeducation comes in. That's where our work comes in. But you would be talking to her at that point about, so this is where your child comes in. This is where your child grabs the steering wheel of the car. This is where your child takes over. And it's a very common and typical trigger, a raised voice. As soon as she feels that someone is disapproving of her, that kind of thing, this is where the trigger takes place.
So tell us about the experience you had a week or two ago.
My housemate was yelling at me because I'd separated his washing before putting the washing in the washing machine.
He'd left you to do his washing for him very nicely. So you'd done his washing, but he wasn't happy with how you'd done it.
No. Basically, he opened the door. Well, he knocked on my door and just started, "Why did you do my washing?" And I was like, "Because you did, but you separated them." And I said, "But you always separate your dark colours from your white colours. That's how most people do washing. And you can't wash your dark colours and your white colours together." And he went ballistic that how dare I separate his washing. He left them in one part.
Started shouting.
And I shouldn't have done that. And usually I would have just cried and slammed the door. And as I was actually going to slam the door, I just went, "No, well, hang on a second. I haven't done anything wrong." And I said, "I separated the washing because you separate washing. You separate darks and whites."
You did the right thing for the washing. Right.
So the adult came through.
So this is the point where the client recognizes the adult came through. She's recognizing the different parts of herself and the fact that this was her adult speaking. And this was an extraordinary moment. A lot of the times you'll see clients do this. You see how she slightly underplays this. This was actually an extraordinary moment. So for maybe, 20, 30 years, this client has never acted like this in front of anyone who's raised their voice or looked disapproving of her. And yet there she was. And of course, the extraordinary thing, which is what we see again and again, is that it's so easy for the adult to do this. It's once they get the idea and do the correct self-parenting so that the adult can speak, then they really understand the idea that this is not difficult for their adult, but their child finds it impossible. And it's this massive difference. And, she does underplay it a little bit. I can assure you this was an extraordinary moment for her. And we go on in the video to anchor that in.
So, so there's this extraordinary moment of your child is thinking, "I've got to run away because I've done something wrong and I'm being disapproved of," and all that stuff, which is years of training. But suddenly your adult starts to think about the situation and quickly realizes, "Hang on a second.
I didn't do it wrong. I did it right.
I haven't done anything wrong." So how different was this for you?
So here's the first moment where, if we were working with this client at this time, this is the kind of thing that we would be doing. We'd be using the client's understanding of difference. I ask this question a lot. I'm always talking about it. I have a whole process called auditing, which you can see on the website, where we're looking at how I did things, how my recovered self is doing things, how my addicted self did things, and look at the difference. Compare the two. Look at how you're being different. Because one of the strongest things in addiction and any kind of low self-worth type of idea is that there's such a bias towards negativity. People don't even realize it. They don't even understand how biased they are towards negativity. And so we go way over the top in positivity. We retrain the brain by talking about difference and by really helping them congratulate themselves, really helping them to and encouraging them to be positive about themselves and to say how great this was that they did this and so on. So just a point though worth mentioning, that you hear me ask the, just how different was this? And instead of telling her, I'm asking.
It was actually empowering. It might sound stupid, but because I'm so used to crying and just going, "Ah!" It was, I actually was, I sat in the room and I was kind of doing the little, and I was doing a little.
Look at me, all grown up.
I know, but it's, you kind of think at 45 years old you'd be grown up by now, but you're not.
It's just this extraordinary idea that we have a past and we have a sense of corporate self that if we don't learn to recognize the voice of the younger parts, and we don't learn to engage the adult in those traumatic and stressful moments, then we just keep doing what we always did. But I just think it's great that you had this experience, and when we have authentic growth, we don't shrink back. We get to keep that.
So again, here we're doing the work of anchoring or solidifying or placing in a secure place this growth, this idea, by helping the client to understand that you get to keep anything that's authentic. It means it's yours. It means you keep it. It means you built it in an authentic way. And so it's worth mentioning here that we would always, you can't overemphasize this enough. You can't say this too often, is that anything this, you reassuring the client, you're saying this will come again, you won't lose this will happen again, you'll see yourself doing it, you'll see yourself doing it naturally, it'll just happen, and so on. And you hear me doing this a lot in my appointments.
So is there been anything since then that you feel a bit more experienced, or you feel it's added to you?
Yeah, it's added to me because I was given a whole lot of shifts that, which is good for me. I was really happy about it, but because the housing is expensive, if they took me off where I was living and put on the universal credit and changed that with the extra shifts, and I did panic for a wee while, and I did try and ask people, well, how exactly does it work?
Right.
And everyone was giving me different answers, and I went, why am I even asking them? And I just went and asked where I was supposed to ask, where usually I would just take little bits from everywhere else, get what I wanted, and go on. But I'd be scared to actually ask people.
But you're recognising a different way forwards, and that seems to just happen now because it's genuine growth. You see, you don't get to give that back. That is just something you keep now, and you'll find that certain processes will just happen automatically differently.
Also, the shifts that he'd given me, I wanted afternoon shifts because of my volunteer work. And he gave me the option, and because he'd given me the option, I just went, and I actually had to come back and go, why am I going, he's asked you a question, you don't have to go, oh no, you do whatever.
Right.
And I went back and I said, I want X, Y, and Z, and I got, I want X, Y, and Z, and I've never asked for X, Y, and Z.
So your child would never have asked for that, but you see your adult will.
Yeah.
So I think you're getting the hang of this now. You can see how these type of questioning is all about getting the client into that positive space that really starts to, as part of what you might call psychoeducation, starts to get them into the understanding that the adult can do this, the child can't. The child won't ask for that, the adult will. The idea that this is permanent now, you've got this now. And that although we don't behave perfectly, none of us ever do, and you won't get this right every time, it's now a part of you. And we're really moving towards what's called integration, which is the final part of this work, which is not about pretending that a part of you doesn't exist, or that it isn't really a part of you, or demanding that it stops doing something, or just having a go at yourself for being a certain way, but just simply understanding that you have different parts of your personality and that they have different triggers and they have different capabilities and so on and so forth. And this is part of the complexity of being a human being.
And that's the access that we're talking about. That's really great to hear. Thanks for talking.
So that's our 3 videos on the inner child work and the way I work with it. I've really enjoyed doing it. I hope you've got a lot out of it. By all means, leave a comment if there are any questions you have or any suggestions you have for further films I might make or further subjects you want to know more about, and I will be happy to do them. Until then, bye for now.